And it's a second look in the UFC for Team Oyama's sub 2-minute knockout winner. We're talking about El Valiente, Fernando Padilla. Was War Tyone the War Master that night? No, Josh Barnett would probably say no, but Padilla was able to get that win. He dropped Julian Erosa twice, and Tyone said, I don't need to see any more. Padilla looking to turn the clock forward to take on the fellow Canadian, Muskoka Cottage Country's own, the monster, Kyle Nelson. And when you look at Kyle Nelson, he's one of those guys that just got a bad draw out of the gate. Early on, he takes on Carlos Diego Ferreira, up a weight class. Had some success early in the fight. Ultimately got finished in that one. But for Kyle Nelson, he might be 2-4-1 in the UFC. But I think the big snapshot for him is his last 3 fights. And it's a win, a loss, and a draw. And even in the loss, he loses against Jai Herbert, but he's able to land 15 thudding leg kicks that made a difference in that fight, especially as it went on. The draw, he's taken on Doo Ho Choi. Had success in the wrestling. Even though he had 5 takedowns, he was losing that fight on the feet. Doo Ho Choi decides in the 3rd round, I'm going to just nudge that head in a little bit closer to your head. He loses a point due to a headbutt in the 3rd round, so it ends up as a draw. Nelson's last time out, he's a big underdog in Vancouver on that pay-per-view card, headlined by Nunes taking on Aldana. And in that one, Matt, Kyle Nelson on the winning end against Blake Bilder. And Bilder was having some success early on the outside. Kyle Nelson, he's got kind of a creaky stance to him. He just marches guys down. He's a little square. He throws
You're moving your head way too much to be Kyle Nelson.
Just everything moves. He throws that leg kick quite a bit, and it was weird because where he was able to touch up Blake Bilder at the end of the 1st round, I thought it was a really close round until Nelson landed a big right hand that kind of got Bilder's attention. And after that, round 2, round 3, Bilder wasn't willing to crash the distance, and then Kyle Nelson was able to have all the success on the outside. And that might not happen in a fight like this where Nelson's fighting at a disadvantage in terms of the reach by 5 inches by the numbers and 2 inches in terms of the height. But when you look at a guy like Fernando Padilla, there's a lot to like about this guy in this fight. El Valiente, the brave, Mexico's own Fernando Padilla, the former Fury FC champ. He got a win on Fury FC 46, looking for a fight. He was signed to the UFC, and that was back in 2021. You look at a guy like Fernando Padilla, he hasn't fought in a meaningful amount of time. He did an interview, and that's coming up with a guy that you guys know and love from MMA Sucka, James Lynch. And in that one, the question was, well, why is there such a layoff? And the quotable was, just the visa. Really, to be real with you, just the visa issues. And other than that, he's been training for the last couple of years. And Padilla comes out of a great gym. We're talking about Team Oyama with some of the best in the world. Former champ Carlos Esparza, Colin Oyama. We've seen him corner a lot of fighters in the UFC. But for Padilla, you look at all of the fights. He starts off his pro career back at 18 years old in Mexico in a co-main event slot of all things. And that was a card that was headlined, and one half of it was Jorge Gonzalez, you know, the guy that was supposed to be in the UFC, but he had a dirty USADA sussy. And Gonzalez just couldn't make the walk a few years ago. So when you look at it for a guy like Padilla, at such a young age, he was able to accrue a nice record. He fought a good level competition. He had a loss back to Dan Ige that was 2 fights before Ige was in the UFC. He had a win over Derek Minner where Minner was beating him and he took him down. And then all of a sudden, Padilla just pulls out a submission win and Minner's just like laid out on the canvas. It was just a crazy win over with the LFA. Padilla continues. He gets rolling. His last loss was to Spike Carlisle 4 years ago. He beats Nate Richardson by split decision. I went back and watched that. I thought that Padilla won that one. And then his last time out against Cameron Graves, it was like, listen, Padilla might struggle in this area, in that area. Padilla was walking him down, beating him sound. And Padilla, with all of those successes on the regional scene and whatnot, he's a tricky guy because he doesn't check leg kicks at all. Like, at all. And he stands heavy on his lead leg. I don't know what it could look like in a switch stance situation. And the other thing for Padilla, he does like to snap that jab out there, sometimes with not much behind it. I mean, you will see the right hand. You'll see it as a hook, an uppercut, so on and so forth. Not a big guy to be throwing feints out there, but the leg kick situation does kind of concern me a little bit in this fight.
It concerns me a little bit, but the thing about Kyle Nelson is he well-rounded? He is. He can win fights on the feet. He does do a better job on the outside than I think a lot of people would believe, at least offensively, and I think that comes down to he's normally eating shots from that position too in a lot of his matchups, so they will look a little bit more 50-50-ish or even a little bit less so for him if he is eating a lot of those shots, but he can have success in that one position. The thing that I do like about Kyle Nelson, though, is he's not going to beat himself. He's just going to try so hard that it might put him in positions where he could get beat, and I know that might sound like I'm trying to poke fun at him, but I'm not at all. He's going to pressure you forward. He's going to make it an ugly fight until he can't anymore, be it because he's eaten so many shots, and I do like that kind of a style against somebody like Padilla, who I had a lot of question marks coming into the UFC, especially based on who they gave him in his opening fight. Juicy. He's a good fighter, Julian Rosa. I know he's been stopped early in some matchups, but he's one of those fighters that, hey, if you catch him cold, you can probably knock him out and look really good. But if you can't catch him cold, he can ease his way into the fight. It's a really long 15-minute night for you out there. And for Padilla, I was really impressed to see him go out there and get the stoppage so quickly, but that's why I kind of have to get ahead of myself right now. Is it one of those performances where I try not to hype it up in my mind so much because it is against a well-known fighter who we all know can look really good on his best day, but Rosas is another one of these guys. I brought this up with Jamie Mullarkey last weekend. It's, hey, Mullarkey can look really good in some fights, but when you catch him early, it looks that much worse. For Padilla, I just want to say I don't want to put too much stock into the last one, even though it was a great win and whatnot. I just had a lot of those question marks, like you say, not only with the leg kicks, when you can eliminate some of the range that he works with, you can have success against him. He holds those hands very high, and almost like a borderline tie stance, it leaves the body open, it does leave the legs open, and if Kyle Nelson does have the game plan of, hey, I'm putting my head in his chest, I'm just going to make it an ugly fight, try to incorporate my own boxing, I think he can have a lot of success. I just worry about how many shots Nelson's going to eat on his way in to close that distance.
And against Billy Quarantillo, Kyle Nelson was on the receiving end of takedowns against and accost him. He went out there in the Jai Herbert fight. He struggled at range against a boxer. That could play out in this fight as well. But when you look at it for Fernando Padilla, when he needs to go in for the kill, he goes in for it. And you saw that against Rosa. 1, 2, 3. Then it ended up as a 9-punch combo. Drops Rosa twice. Tyone says no more. They protested the stoppage a little bit on commentary, and then they seemed by the end of it like they were cool with it. But Matt, when you do look at this one, we'll see if Nelson's going to go out there and employ the takedowns. We did see it against Choi. We also saw it against Matt Sales. But for Nelson, in 6 of 7 UFC contests, he was the underdog. The only time Nelson has been favored in the UFC was at Elevation, fighting against Mexico's own Apollo Reyes, and he stunned the crowd, getting an early knockout win against a guy who's been knocked out a time or two.
I was like 9-8 at the time.
When you look at this fight, Matt, Padilla is a pretty big favorite in the matchup. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Again, they're wild this week, so I'm going to say over under 90% Padilla.
I'll say under.
I'll say under, and it is slightly over. 783 total votes, 91% Padilla, 25% by decision, 66% by knockout for the 9% that have Nelson, 75% by decision. Why was Kyle Nelson able to beat Blake Bilder, who's a good boxer but gets clipped, gets rocked in his fights, who has good stick-to-itiveness and good wrestling, because he was able to show that against Shane Young. Ooh, Shane Young. Matt, it was because Kyle Nelson threw a lot of body kicks and a lot of leg kicks. And again, I can't highlight that enough. He could try and do that against Padilla here, and he could have a lot of success with it too.
If he stays at that range, I don't think he's going to have a lot of success with it. I think that's what's going to lead to his downfall. If he does try to play that outside game, it just brings me to what I said the last video. Why would you do the thing that gives your opponent the best chance to give him a win? If you stayed at range against Padilla, he does have much more punching power. He's got better variety to his shots too, because Nelson is much more traditional with a lot of his boxing offense. He's not really going to wow you with the crazy things he does on the feet, whereas Padilla's going to make you pay with unorthodox shots. They're going to come in at weird angles. He's got that weird shovel hook too that almost comes in at like a 3/4 angle. I just think those are all weapons he can use against Kyle Nelson to halt some of that forward pressure Nelson brings into the cage.
I'll go with Padilla in this one. It's UFC Noche. Kind of feels like he should probably win. I know that's kind of a lame way to go about it. But when you do look at Fernando Padilla, I think we brought up some good points for him as well as for Kyle Nelson in this one. So please let us know in the chat who you have in the matchup. Toss a like on your way out. We got some big time fights in this card. Holland versus Della, and in the main event, Grasso Shevchenko, and number 2. You're not going to want to miss any of the action. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.